my great pleasure to be here to co-moderate this webinar. I am Claire Vishik. I spent most of my career doing predominantly emerging technology work in cybersecurity research as an executive industry, working with academia and governments internationally. And one thing that I think is incredibly important is that by now, cybersecurity is a mature field with considerable specialization. This series of webinars is aiming at turn this specialized knowledge into some information about the direction in the big picture. We have an outstanding lineup of experts here who are going to guide us today through this discussion. Without further ado, Steve, on to you to begin the discussion.
Thank you, Claire, and good evening, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you might be. Great pleasure for me also to be here today. I think we have a great panel. Very briefly, something about myself. So I've been in security for just over 30 years now. I spent 15 years in the private sector in various chief information security officer positions. And then I was 15 years in the EU Cybersecurity Agency as head of operations. So a mixed private public background. But you won't hear much from me today because we really have great panelists, and I really want to have them speaking and debating with each other. So let me briefly introduce them. We have George Ataya, who is professor and academic director at the Solvay Business School. We have Jean-Noël de Garzin, who is CEO and founder of the Wallix Group. We have Michael Huth, who will be, as from the 1st of October this year, president of UTN, that's the Technische Universität Nuremberg. We have Mihoko Matsubara, who's chief cybersecurity strategist at NTT Corporation. And last but certainly not least, we have Paul Timmers, who is research associate at Oxford University. Now, many of you have a whole string of titles, so you will forgive me for not mentioning all of them. Let's start the debate, and I'm going to do it in alphabetical order. And what I will ask you to do, please, is very briefly to introduce yourself. And then you have, in total, in fact, a period of 2 minutes to talk about what you believe are the key cybersecurity challenges at the current moment, and also the key opportunities. So without any delay, let me ask George to kick us off.
Thank you very much, Steve. I have been probably as much as you do in cybersecurity, advising European Commission. A few years before internet started, at that time, security was something completely different. We didn't have all those challenges, all those risks. And I think the major challenge that we faced during those years is the fact that we, like the frog in the boiling water, we see it coming, but we didn't notice it was as big and as important. So today it's devastating, and we still have people, decision makers, who are not understanding how important it is to take care of that issue, not from the technical point of view, but from the decision-making point of view, from the priority point of view, from the action, putting things in place, and not only buying things and hoping that everything will be resolved because we spend the money. So there are many challenges. Those are the challenges on the mind of the beholder, if I may say. And this is what we have to really resolve in the coming years. Otherwise, we will continue to be devastated by all those problems that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, George. Any word on opportunities?
The major opportunity today, as I alluded to, is identifying how to bring senior management decision makers to be involved, thinking about risk. Those people, many of them, do not consider the aspect of risk. They do not debate risk. Risk is seldom discussed in boards, and when they are discussing about risk, they are discussing about financial risk, market risk, and not about cybersecurity risk, and about their business, their clients' risk. And I think the concept of risk is a new concept that has to be in the mind of everybody.
Very good. I totally agree, by the way. I think that's an excellent point to kick us off. Jean-Noël, what are your thoughts in your position as head of commercial group in cybersecurity.
Yes, thank you, Steve and George, for this introduction. So I'm the CEO of Walix. A brief introduction: Walix is a software editor specialist of IAM and privileged access management. And we have 3,100 customers in the world. And we try to help the CISO, the CIOs, and I hope all the people deciding about how to mitigate the cyber risks, how to regain control of users and machine access in a digital world. That's exactly our mission. So I think if we try to talk about the big cybersecurity challenge and opportunities, I would say that today we have to help the people understand how cyber issues, cyber risks could be impactful in their daily activity. When we talk about the states, the governments, the organizations, the companies, the people, of course, and how a digital world could be well functioning, sustainable, if it is cyber by design. So I think that our main challenge today is to help our digital world to be more resilient. And I think that we have two phases. We have one phase, which is to deploy, I would say, the skills, the trainings, the sensitization, the equipments, all the services to be able to be resilient when you are an organization, when you are a government, when you are a big or a small group. And after that, you have a second challenge, and we have a second common challenge as industrials and specialists with our users to maintain a resilient digital world during the years coming, which means that we are going to work together with industrials, IT, manufacturing industrials, to create a new generation of value chains where the digital will be cyber by design.
Very good, very good. And I'm very pleased to hear the word resilience pop up already, as it's been a big part of EU policy making. So let's move on. So that was quite clear. Michael, how would you like to give us your take on this?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think one of the challenges I have been seeing in the last few years is really, how public institutions, the public sector in general, and SMEs, are under a lot of pressure. The budget lines are very tight. The security sort of, threats become ever more complex. You're looking at mixed cloud provisions and all sorts of, advanced things that for these companies or institutions are often very difficult to implement or to choose wisely as external products. And so, for example, Transport for London is under an ongoing attack at the moment, and so these are probably institutions where it's very difficult to justify certain budget lines to improve things of that kind. So I think this really also connects to some of the things that were said before. This needs policymakers, those who actually control budgets and so on, to pull together and to actually understand, what do we have to do to make the digital, as Jean-Noël said, resilient and cyber by design. And that's an easy thing to say once you have already an operating network that serves 9-10 million people every day, say in London Transport as an example. I think the opportunities, I would say, are probably also coming through AI, and not just generative AI, but sort of very advanced machine learning, data-driven things that we now do, also lots of Bayesian techniques. So even around access control, if I'm thinking of zero trust architectures, I can actually imagine fairly, sophisticated intelligence, real-time intelligence informs some of these access control policies within such a framework. So I think there's really good opportunities here. The one thing that worries me about generative AI is, this is essentially an existential thing mathematically. It's generating sort of a statistical hypothesis or judgment, whereas attackers, they just need to find one of these existentials. Yes, so the defenders, need to go for the universals. So I think there's probably a bit of an asymmetry here that makes me a little bit nervous, so this might also call for some formal methods tying in with use of AI and so on. And finally, maybe an uncertainty around what will code bases look like in future years. Now that generative AI is really influencing how code gets at least, prototyped before it gets merged and so on and reviewed. So it's not clear to me whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, in terms of getting more exposure of, say, day zero attacks when it's conventionally programmed or through these tools. So I think that's just one thing to watch out for.
Oh, very good. Thank you. Some nice keywords coming up there, which I'm sure we will delve into later. So let's pass on. Let's go to Mihoko.
Sure. Thank you so much. So my name is Mihoko Matsuba. I'm currently Chief Cybersecurity Strategist. I'm responsible for cybersecurity thought leadership at NTT Corporation based in Tokyo. But I'm responsible for global outreach. And I'm so thrilled to share the stage with such an distinguished experts. So to talk about challenge, I would say the acute shortage of cybersecurity professionals. So Michael already mentioned the difficulties to justify the budget for cybersecurity. But actually, the newest statistics just published by ISC2 or formerly ISC Square found out that the gap between the cybersecurity professional demand and supply already reached 4.8 million people in the world. And the top reason why we face such shortage of cybersecurity workforce globally is actually the shortage of budget for cybersecurity. So it means that now we have a bigger attack surface provided by more connected devices to the internet. So we have more IT or OT assets to protect, but we have a smaller number of people to do our cybersecurity work. So it means that the more burden on the shoulders of cybersecurity professionals, and the more stress and fatigue cybersecurity professionals are actually suffering. And it is actually scary that Gartner already predicted back in 2023 that by 2025, 50% of global cybersecurity professionals will quit their job by 2025. And actually, 25% of those people quitting actually are leaving the cybersecurity community for good because they just cannot keep doing it. So here's an opportunity. So again, Michael already said that so generative AI or the sophisticated machine learning will be opportunities for us to reduce the burden on the cybersecurity professionals because it will help us to at least to reduce or decrease the noises in the cybersecurity work. And of course, we cannot automate everything for cybersecurity work, but at least we can reduce the amount of work for cybersecurity community.
So I have to stop you there, I'm afraid, because we've reached the limit, but I think you raised a number of excellent points, and you also brought in OT and not just IT, which I thought was nice because I personally think this is one of the big challenges for the future as well. Excellent. So I think you've already raised a number of very interesting points. So now I will open up the debate. Claire will take over. So Claire, would you like to take over from here?
Thank you. Excellent points that that we had here. Has everyone spoken?
I think I should still get a turn.
Sorry, Paul. Yeah. Sorry. I beg your pardon. Paul, please.
No problem, Steve. Steve, Claire, David, thank you for inviting me. My name is Paul Timmers. I'm currently working as a researcher and also as an advisor, where my main area of interest is geopolitics and technology. And with that background, I can add to that many years in the European Commission as a director responsible for cybersecurity and digital society. What I would say is I will mention two key challenges and related opportunities. So being perhaps a bit dramatic, but clear, perhaps I would say the first one is cyber is war. So I think cyber has really become geopoliticized. Gets militarized. We see increasingly attacks that are also hybrid, both cyber and physical, and that are also cross-sector. So cyber is coming out of the kind of the digital box. Attacks that affect the electricity system will also affect the digital systems, and conversely, just to mention an example. And we see this coming from actual sabotage, for example, initiated by Russia in Europe. And of course, we see it very much happening live, sadly, in Ukraine in many, many ways. But we see it also in the pre-positioning that China is doing. Very worrying. So just this morning, a think tank, SER, to which I'm affiliated, published a report about the telecommunications sector and the future of the telecommunications sector in Europe. I provided a chapter in that about telecoms resilience and security. And in that chapter, one of the recommendations is that you really need to tackle security in that sector in a holistic way. You cannot keep it in the box of only telecoms and telecoms law. And you need to think about it, that this is far beyond a civil matter. It's also a military matter. And actually, I say, we need to be prepared for war on the European continent. Now, these kind of recommendations are not happy to give, and not everybody believes them. Some people will say, no, don't talk about it because, you create anxiety. Others will say, we are already getting prepared. And others will say, no, absolutely, you have to do that. I think it's actually an opportunity also, breaking out of that box in which we have confined so far cybersecurity, and also breaking out of the box or going from sectoral approaches and adding to that, at least, if not replacing that by horizontal approaches. Excellent. And reusing then also experience. George talked about risk management. There's a lot of experience in other sectors with risk management.
Yes, very good. And of course, for those of you who don't know, Paul was personally involved together with his staff in building the current EU approach to resilience. So he's really well positioned to point out the geopolitical angle on all this. So that's great. So once again, my apologies, Paul, for leaving you out. Let's now move into the debate, and I'll ask Claire to take over.
Thank you very much. What interesting ideas have we heard now? One interesting thing that's today with regard to cybersecurity is that some areas were traditionally considered significant opportunities. Now they have come along as also potential challenges. I will give you a few prompts, and please answer why you think a certain area is a challenge or an opportunity, or both, and how we can deal with it. A very brief answer. Traditionally, standards were considered an opportunity. It's an opportunity to consolidate and integrate and test the views on certain technical environments and make sure there is interoperability. But recently, there has been a lot of events happening that indicated that standards could also be a challenge. The proliferation of standards in IEEE, for instance, based on technologies from hostile geographies is one example. Another example is the slow movement in standardization. Yet another example is the desire to accommodate all requirements, creating different frameworks, even in very supposedly compact areas such as common criteria. So, distinguished panelists, please tell us, do you think standardization is a challenge, an opportunity, both, and how do we deal with challenges, if there are any? Who wants to start?
Sorry, you are Steve, we don't hear you.
So sorry, I muted my mic. I think Paul raised his hand. Maybe you did also, John Noel, so it doesn't really matter. Whichever.
Okay, so Paul, I don't see the hand raised because I'm full screen.
Sorry, yeah.
Paul, please
I
start.
raised the physical hand rather,
Yeah,
rather
that's
than
the way
Zoom
to do
hand.
it. Please start, Paul.
Very briefly, I think the standardization processes are a challenge. So we have seen some of the failures. I think actually the failure of that when we are talking about 5G security. 5G security
Yes.
not sufficiently involving actually governments, so that the security of that they are really worried about core of government was not safeguarded. Of course, that is changing now, and so you see a lot more involvement of governments, for example, in the transatlantic setting. At the same time, we do not yet know whether these processes will be better, because now it becomes more difficult to make it multilateral or to make it international, which is typically a kind of thing that we want to have in standardization. So I want to briefly point here to one of the research projects I'm involved in, the REMIT project, that is looking at technology and multilateralism, which is has this kind of challenge to address and think about it from perhaps an academic perspective. Can you marry both kind of the drive for national and economic security with international and global standardization?
Excellent point. Thank you. Anyone else wants to speak up on this topic? Yes, please, George.
Yes, actually, when we look at standardization and the time that it takes to implement any standard, it's like laws. They are almost obsolete once they are implemented. So we have really to be careful that the standard is a baseline, and on top of the standard, we have to add all those adequate specific requirements for us. And standardization will allow all those bad pupil, if I may say, to catch up, but and allow us to talk to each other. But again, technology goes so fast, law goes so fast when actually the relation between people and the needs for business needs go so fast that we cannot expect that standardization would be resolving all the problems. However, it is certainly a baseline that is sometimes required, and when it is done adequately, it brings us one maturity level above. So it's something that we have to live with, and we have to accept and adopt fast, because if we do not adopt fast, we are kind of marginalized and not able to speak to each other and work with each other in an adequate way. So there are plus and cons to standardization, but it's something that we cannot avoid, in my opinion.
Thank you. Please, Jean-Noël.
Yes. No, I think that as George mentioned, the technology are going so fast. So there are many technologies, and while these technologies are evaluating so fast, I would say that the users couldn't follow the adoption of these technologies. So I think that an interesting thing is happening regarding cybersecurity risk. This particular idea that we have to create a kind of regulation which is a regulation oriented to the customer needs, to the users' needs, and we have to align our, I would say, cyber production, the services we are providing, the technology we are providing, the trainings we are providing. We have to provide all these materials, these products, these services, to help them to achieve a certain level of, I would say, cyber resilience. With the new directive NIS2, for example, in Europe, we have an example on the GDPR, also on the protection of data. We have users regulations, or regulations to help users understand how they could reach a certain level of cybersecurity and resilience. And I think that it's a way to standardize the level of security all the users have to reach if they want to resist to the cyber attacks and the cyber threats. And I think it's a very useful approach. And for example, at Walix, we consider that we have to certify our solutions. We have to be sure that our solutions are completely in line with the regulation and the way we are going to encourage and to push the users to standardize their investment and their equipment regarding the regulation. I think it's a key moment, particularly in continent like Europe. We have the same kind of frameworks in the US, in Asia Pacific, in China, in many countries today. And it is because we have to I would say, to go slower to help our users to understand and to follow the evolution of our cyber innovation, I would say. We have to lower and to adapt to users.
Thank you. Excellent point. One comment here is that if the traditional technologies are negatively affected by new attacks, it's impossible to go slower. That's why there is a trend, especially in software, where open source is considered to be a substitute to traditional standardization. Somebody wants to speak to this? What do you think about it? Is it a substitute? Does it have its own weaknesses? Anyone?
I mean, I can say maybe a few words on that. I mean, I like the thought of taking open source. I mean, if you think of Linux, I mean, that's a great example, I guess, so that gives you quite a bit of resilience. I mean, there are issues every now and then, but there's a lot of people looking at this and vetting it, and there's formal processes for merging code bases and so on. So, there is a community-driven common purpose, I guess, to achieve these kinds of goals. So maybe also in AI development, we're seeing now so many open source models, large language models, and multimodal versions of these things. Again, I think the transparency there is really important, so that this can feed into the research institutes and the universities to get additional scrutiny and, improving these technologies and the conceptual understanding of them. So I think that's maybe an example also, as Jean-Noël said, where standardizations is probably not the right way to go about it, simply because there's 100 of these things popping out every day or so. So you need a large community to keep track of this and do that well.
Excellent answer. Thank you, Georges.
Yeah, when we talk about open source, or when we talk about open source software, we then have to talk about what are the intention of those who are participating in the development of that software or that open source tool in bringing non-functional requirements, security requirement, modularity requirement, etc. So it is important that when we talk about open source, that we ensure that those non-functional needs that are otherwise thought of from the first time, those architecture homogeneity that are built when there is a central decision making, are still there and continue to be there once there are many parties involved in building open source. So this is my major field when we talk about open source, is that there would be no central body deciding on non-functional or on architectural and other issues that can become important, and otherwise, as we heard earlier, able to adapt those open source into new to face new threats that we face from day to another, and ensure that somebody is going to take that effort, and then somebody is going to spread all over the open source instances those improvements.
So, Claire, I think in the interest of time, I should move the debate on a little bit. Mihoku, you haven't spoken here, so maybe I will give you the first opportunity in this next part. And so you've all raised a lot of really interesting points. My perspective as someone who's been in the industry for so long is that I sometimes get the feeling that we do the same mistakes over and over again, and we don't learn an awful lot. I could give you several examples. I won't. I would ask you perhaps in the different areas you've mentioned, because you've all mentioned challenges, perhaps you could try and talk about, the failures in the past and what we might learn from them, which make them challenges. So, Mihoko, could I start with you in the sense that you didn't perhaps get an opportunity in the last question?
Sure. So everybody has been talking about the weakest link in cybersecurity is small and medium-sized companies over the last decades, but we haven't really improved that challenge yet. So I think it's one of the biggest failure, because small and medium-sized company, even though that they are smaller in terms of the size of their business, but they play such an important role to play for our supply chain. So why we, meaning the government, the public government, the industry and academia, can work together to help them to incorporate their cybersecurity into the bigger communities to help them. So we already talked about standardization, and standardization is great to help the level of cybersecurity a little bit more, but bigger players have lots of resources to plan, to understand and deploy, and also to maintain a good cybersecurity based upon new standardization. But what about small and medium-sized companies?
Right.
They just cannot really understand how to deal with it.
That's a great point, Mihoka. Especially, I would say, of course, you're in Japan. In Europe, of course, the economy is built on small and medium-sized enterprises. So for us, this is critical to our survival, I would say. But we have a shining example of someone, a company that's doing really well with Jean-Noël and Wallach. So given that Mihoko has raised this point, and you're right in the middle of it, Jean-Noël, perhaps you would like to give your perspective on this?
I would say that actually to face the cybersecurity challenge today, an alliance between all. A few days ago, I organized an annual summer university for an organization where I'm the president, called Exatrust. We have, I would say, 1,200 people coming to people from the state, from the government, people coming from the university, from companies, industries, small, big companies. And the idea I try to push, to drive, to lead, I would say, is to try to create it is a French event. So I try to create the French team to face cybersecurity threats. What does it mean? It means that to manage, to face the cyber attacks, we need to work like an ecosystem, and we need to work like a team. And I think that the French team has to coordinate with the European teams and the teams from every country in the world where we want to face the cyber challenge. So I think that today, to face the cyber challenge, we need the small and medium-sized technology providers to work with the big companies, the big integrators, the big operators, the big services providers, and to coordinate ourselves to industrialize our technology and to deliver this technology at the scale of the needs in the customer's organization, medium-sized organizations, healthcare organizations, industrial organizations, etc. And it's a common, challenge. So we have to work together.
Yeah,
that's my main focus out of my company. My main focus is to make an ecosystem raises in Europe, for example.
I think this is actually an excellent point. And I've long felt, for instance, myself, that this idea of creating consortia out of small and medium-sized enterprises with complementary skill sets to compete against the big players is really the way to go. And you also mentioned mentoring. So I think this is something where I would like to pass over to Paul, because Paul, in the Commission, you had a lot of experience with this kind of thing. What's your take on this? How do you think we can improve our competitivity for the small and medium-sized enterprise in Europe in the cybersecurity space?
I think you're making a really good point that collaboration is a key element in it, and learning, mutual learning, reusing experiences. But I would add to that two things. One that has already been mentioned here. We cannot wait, and we have to act quick. So there's a need for speed. Collaboration takes time, I know, but we will have to have creative, other kind of approaches. Perhaps Claire referred to open source, might be one of those, but other approaches that allow us to act much faster. Need for speed. And the second is, we need to also accompany this with more foresight. So we are very reactive in the field of cybersecurity and very little anticipatory. And we can actually, at some moment in time, say, hey, people actually could have known about this challenge coming. In open source, when we think about open source, we need to start getting prepared for the social processes of open source also being hacked. We have already seen that. So take the exact backdoor. So we can anticipate, you talked about, Michael, about AI. We should anticipate what that is. And we could have anticipated, and we do anticipate to some degree, that actually cyber and AI and democracy are not compatible. They don't live happily together. We will have to give up somewhere. So I think this means not only not ducking the issues, but also looking much more forward. And sure, this you can do in a collaborative way.
Very good. So let me ask Michael. So we went a bit off topic, but I'm really pleased we did, because I think this was a very good discussion. But I was really asking for examples of failures, you know, in the areas you mentioned. Could you give us some examples of where you've seen failure over the last 10 years and what we've learned from it and how we should do things differently in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the startup world, which is also, you know, one thing that I had experience in, because I'm a co-founder of Xane, you know, an AI company out of Berlin that's doing a legal co-pilot Nox tour. I mean, in the early days in that startup, the ecosystem of startups, this was when GDPR really sort of hit the road, so to speak. And, you know, all the pitches kind of looked like we're GDPR compliant and so on. So, you know, this was probably not a shining example how startups sort of take on this. So this is not specifically about Xane, but just, you know, the general landscape was really trying to use this to maybe raise money. So I think to turn this around, you know, you mentioned Europe being a place of small markets. So I think, you know, apart from the big platform players in Asia and the US, Europe really has a lot going for in these niche markets. Yes. So if, I mean, that's one story that Xane sort of discovered, just to understand what is, for example, German-speaking client lawyer privilege, you know, what's the actual legislations there? What does that mean when you use generative AI within this context? What are the ramifications for that in deploying cybersecurity or relying on the cybersecurity of your clients and so on? So this is a very niche sort of special interest thing, but there's actually quite a demand for this sort of thing. So I think this is really an illustration maybe of how, you know, this traditionally quite, you know, sort of faceted European market with medieval cities, so to speak, you know, if you go back in history and lots of trades and so on, I think this can actually live in a modern digital technology just as well with similar economic prospect.
Very good. So George, I'm going to put you on the spot for a little bit. I hope you don't mind, because I know you quite well. But your initial comments were about boards and decision making, and I fully align with your observations. And I think that would be a good example of a failure. How would you suggest that we make this better? How can we reach boards and get them to make the right decisions at the right time?
Thank you, Steve. I think if we bring, I was going to talk in relation to that topic, that if we bring that to another dimension, to the SMEs, I think the failure is that those people still believe today that one person, a joker person who is able to do everything, can resolve all their IT and cybersecurity solutions. And that's the major problem that I face almost every day, seeing all those senior executives or general managers of a small or medium-sized enterprise, or even average-sized hospitals, or even average-sized manufacturing companies. They believe that we are going to hire somebody, we will pay her or him well, and we hope that that person is going to make miracles. It does not exist today in my mind, and probably in the mind of some of the people around this table, but not in mine. Though all those necessary competence to be able to understand network security, electronic signature, architecture, operation, response management, and I can cite all those domains of expertise that even medicine today, that has so many branches, that exploded its branches in every domain, probably does not have as many specialties as much as today cybersecurity. So we cannot expect that one person is going to resolve all the sins of the world, if I may say the word. So the issue is that we have to find ways to allow those organizations, SMEs, first to change their mind in finding that person, because even if that person is found, that person will be hired out 6 months from now. And so we have to make them change their mind and finding out how can they probably outsource. As long as they do not have those skills in-house, they have to outsource to experts. So those experts with 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 people, and calling on external additional experts for specific domains of expertise. I think this is the solution that will allow us to help not few hundreds or few thousand, tens of thousands of enterprises in every organization, in every country in Europe. And that's what we have really to resolve.
No, very good. And if I may, I would also draw a connection with what Mihoko said about burnout. And I think this is one of the things that is causing burnout. It's not reasonable, but I'm eating into Claire's time. So Claire, I'm going to pass back to you for the next question.
Thank you very much. We talked about challenges, opportunities, failures, lessons learned. Now let's talk about the regulatory environment and the role it plays in the cybersecurity arena. Let's talk about what, in your opinion, is the most important regulation that has shaped cybersecurity. For the sake of focusing on cybersecurity, let's leave out the GDPR and talk about other areas. Please briefly talk about why you consider it is important, if it's in a good or bad way, what are direct and indirect consequences, and anything else that you think is relevant, but only brief answers. An example I could give here that was not meant to be related to cybersecurity is the US deregulation for telecoms of 1996. It certainly did not intend to affect the security of the internet or telecoms, but the way it was designed, it certainly had a significant detrimental effect on both by taking away resources and reallocating them in a way that was not intended. So there are many examples of this nature, positive and negative, throughout the history of the modern regulation. Let's talk about it. Paul, why don't you start?
Yeah, thank you very much, Claire. Of course, a topic that is close to my heart because I was with, of course, the team in the European Commission at the time guilty of introducing the Network and Information Security Directive. But if you would say what I find today most important is actually what goes beyond that. So in Europe, that is the Network and Information Security Directive in the revised version, what is called the NIS2. And I would see that back to back with another piece of law, the Cyber Resilience Act, which is more about the components that you need to have in your critical systems. And similar kind of obligations are have been presented around the world. In Japan, in the United States with executive orders, in Korea, in other places, we see similar kind of requirements on critical infrastructures combined with supply side component level, you might say, requirements for cybersecurity. So I think that's really an important part of the puzzle of regulatory obligations in whatever form that's fitting with your regulatory and legislative system and wherever you are in the world. And where also you see that because everybody has to work on that, these are the topics that you see at international level. This is what people are talking about in bilateral dialogues. This is what they are talking about in the UN. This is on which you can do confidence building measures, in which you can do capacity building with, for example, telecom operators around the world. So I think that's a very important, but it's only part of the puzzle. Because as people have been saying here now, you know, cyber is all of society. So what about the rest of society, which is not the telecom operators and the energy operators and the other critical infrastructure operators? And what about all of the stuff that you buy every day and get in your pocket, and which is actually insecure quite often, and still you get it in the market? So how do we address that?
Excellent points. Thank you, Paul. Michael, you have worked in industry, academia, and now you are a university administrator. From your position, what do you think was the most important from the regulatory point of view in cybersecurity?
Yeah, that's a hard question in a way. I mean, I think we had heard some great examples from Paul around regulatory muscle, if I may say so. But I think there's also regulatory vitamins, you know, and so I would like to maybe cite this US Act on cybersecurity information sharing, and I know the UK has similar sort of initiatives. I think it's very important to create incentives and also some protections, which this act does for, you know, around liability and privacy protections when sharing information, because that's actually what we heard from all in this room today. You know, we need to get together, lots of different stakeholders need to share experiences and so on. So I think this, to me, is one of the most important things that I took away from my past experiences, that we have to speak to each other and share information, but also build up trust as we engage in these conversations.
Outstanding point. And it's not only very important, it's also extremely difficult to create this atmosphere of trust in a framework for information sharing, something for all of us to think about. Miho, what is your view? What was the most important?
Thank you. So to piggyback just now what just Michael said, now to build trust. So I think that what we really need is a community leader. Even though the cybersecurity community is small and everybody knows everybody, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody feels comfortable to share information on what kind of struggles they have, what kind of cyber attacks they face, what kind of cybersecurity solutions they use. So if they have a community leader, everybody trusts and everybody respects and everybody listens, like, hey, if because he or she is saying this, we should listen and do this. And if he or she stays in that community for a longer time and they can meet up regularly, at least on a monthly basis in person, then I think it's relatively easier for them to create an ecosystem to share the information in a win-win manner, not just one person, one organizations and listens and not sharing at all.
Claire, may I interject unusually? Because I would just like to make a point which I think may help here. I received a number of times over the last few years an interesting comment about information sharing and building trust. And a lot of industry told me in private that they thought that information sharing with governmental institutions was asymmetric, in the sense they gave a lot, but they didn't get a lot back again. And I think there's some truth in this. So I just inject it into the debate because I think it's worth discussing, and it may be one of the things that's blocking trust.
Yeah, it's a well-known phenomenon. The same is true about the information sharing between certain countries, certain areas where it's also asymmetric based on various parameters and considerations. One thing to consider, people here indicated that automation, artificial intelligence are opportunities for cybersecurity, and they are, but they are impossible to be effective without information sharing. There will be a huge number of limitations if the models are limited, if the automation is designed in a way that only takes a certain number of parameters into consideration. Something to consider. Jean-Noël, what do you think about the most important regulatory environment or regulation that emerged in cybersecurity?
Oh, we won't spend too much time on GDPR because, but I
No.
really think that the world should be GDPR, not only particular countries or Europe, because it's something important to remind that humans have to keep the control of the machines, and artificial intelligence without any limit could be very dangerous for humans. So I think it's really interesting to keep a limit and to recover the control of our personal informations. So I think it's something key. It doesn't stop the information sharings, or it is still possible to exchange information, so it is not putting limits on that. I think that, of course, as it has been told before, NIS directive here is really key for resilience, is really something which could give a standard to users, to organizations, to different enterprise who are companies who are going to invest in their resilience. So I think it's a really key appointment. NIS 2 in this year is a really key directive and a key appointment to encourage all our users to be compliant with this regulation. And I think that we are current. I will terminate with the EUCS, which is currently discussed. And I think that to be more symmetric in terms of information sharing in the world, we would take advantage in keeping all the opportunities in the EUCS regulation, and perhaps to keep an opportunity to develop cloud environments where our informations are shared with certain conditions, or not shared if we don't want to share. So I think it's this appointment with EUCS and the way EUCS will be adopted by the European Commission, for example, European Parliament, will be really key and important. And I remind everybody that the users in many countries, the big organizations, the big groups, are asking for a high plus level where they could choose to share or not informations.
Thank you. It's impossible to disagree with that. George, you get to make the concluding remarks on this topic. What's important for you?
Well, I would like to continue on that topic of sharing, and I would like to mention how much the European Commission is funding projects related to sharing. We are involved in 3 projects, and I will mention some of them, all of them actually, all those 3. We are building cyber hubs to ensure that the demand and the offer of skills in Europe, and that cyber hub project is going to be active initially in more than 10 countries. We are building an education that is called, that will be a master in cybersecurity, that will be rolled over all over Europe, and it will be accredited only in 1 country, sufficiently accredited and able to be effective in all European countries. We have been developing all the different modules. It will be most probably active already in 2025. We have also been starting a new project called Co-Cyber, which objective is to ensure that the civil and the defense sectors are involved with each other and are sharing their tools, their methods, their frameworks, and whatever exchange they could they could benefit from each other. So there is a huge importance for standardization, as we talked before, of understanding of the aspect of risk, and mainly for sharing and communication. So I think we are going to we are on the right direction. The question is to persevere and ensure that as mentioned earlier, all those activities are implemented, all those standards are adequately implemented, and all those good practices, not only implemented by technicians, as I mentioned earlier, but implemented also by senior executives and those who, at the end of the day, can make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. It's interesting, but not surprising that the focus is on the opportunities of NIS2 and information sharing, certainly two key topics that no one can disagree with. Now, let's discuss the role of technology. Steve, I am passing over to you for that discussion.
Thank you very much, Claire. Excellent discussion. Lots of ideas flowing through my mind as I hear the different panelists bringing out ideas. For instance, when George was talking, the idea of dual-use technology popped into my head, which is another regulatory issue. But unfortunately, we can't go through them all. So indeed, we're going to switch to another aspect of the discussion today, and that is, do you think we're relying too much on technology? Now, I must admit, my personal opinion is I think yes, but I'm not here to debate it with you. And I happen to know that Mihoco has a different point of view. So I will ask Mihoco, please, to open us up and perhaps give us your view on technology and how it can contribute to the cybersecurity solutions of tomorrow, I would say. Mihoco.
Sure. So again, if I may, I'd like to go back to the discussions on the AI or generative AI. So well, generative AI has still lots of challenges, but also it creates opportunities because it actually reduce the times to find vulnerabilities. And okay, this will be an opportunity for attackers to find vulnerabilities to breach, but also it's good for blue team or red teams to find vulnerabilities to fix our vulnerable systems. So what my NTT colleagues actually use ChatGPT to see if they can find websites to see if they are legitimate or phishing sites. And if they use GPT-4, the accuracy ratio to tell if the website is legitimate or phishing is over 98%. And even if they use GPT 3.5, the accuracy ratio is still over 86%. So I think that is why I think that ChatGPT will create the future for cyber defenders to increase.
I guess my feeling is, if I may interject, what happens when you're in the 2%, which is not correct? I think technology is extremely useful, but I also think in something as important as security, where at the end of the day, lives might matter, etc., that there will in many cases be need for a human behind doing the checking. So I see this as an extra control measure. Not always, it depends on the risk profile, of course, but in some cases as well. But okay, I think thanks a lot. I think that was a very good introduction to the subject. So I would like to move over to Mikael, because you have made a lot of technical comments and obviously very savvy about the technical world. So what would your take on this be?
Yeah, I mean, I think user-centric security is very important. I think Jean-Noël also, said interesting things around data sharing and so on. I think my question I have around these things is, what's the cognitive load for trying to do these things? There might be the best intentions, or individuals might feel strongly about, controlling their sharing and so on. But if you just look at how we interact with cookies on web pages, this is sort of not really the way it should go, right? So, and this is just the beginning in a way of the effects of, say, GDPR. So, I mean, I'm fully behind the legislation. I'm just kind of wondering, as the sort of real world and the digital world are merging more and more, and, all the things we're doing in our daily lives have some kind of digital mediation more and more. What will this mean for how we actually engage with the external world and with people around us? And, so I think, just having a security agent within our brains that constantly monitors these things is just not going to work, So So I'm not having any solutions here. I'm just sort of posing this as a topic I think that we will probably see in the next 10, 15 years.
Yeah, look, I mean, I've got at the back of my mind, I don't know if anyone ever saw the film 2001: A Space Odyssey, but of course, this is where HAL, the famous computer, takes over and makes bad decisions based on faulty information. This is a bit of a nightmare scenario, of course, especially as you can't turn him off. So, turning to Paul, you've worked a lot with societal issues, etc. Do you think we have an over-reliance on technology? Do you think the balance is good? And which way do you think we should go?
Yeah, you see, water flows to the lowest point, and cybercrime flows to the lowest point. And what is the lowest point? Bad technology and weak society. And I think society has a right to be weak. We cannot demand of everybody to be tech savvy, to be prepared, you know. So I think we have to fully accept that people are vulnerable and organizations are vulnerable. So technology needs to be less weak, needs to be better. And there can also be initiatives for that. There is an initiative running at this moment in time, a manifesto, including launched by a joint colleague of us, Steve, Freddy de Zure, about which is a call to big tech to use their massive infrastructure and their insight in the threat actors to improve cybersecurity worldwide by delivering baseline security controls as default. So actually the technology can be better. You have to deliver it set with baseline security. Secondly, I think also technology indeed needs to be better. I have always felt that it is somewhat unfair that CIOs of hospitals are punished because they didn't update their Windows systems when we had the WannaCry attack. Who, in first instance, delivered a Windows system that was not secure? And so we have to, I think, also expect that technology can get better. I think that's kind of an appeal to the tech industry. Who certainly voluntarily can respond to that. But I think in the long run, if it is not voluntarily, it will have to be enforced.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think you yourself referred at the beginning of the session to the CRA. I think the CRA will definitely help in this area with the new requirements it's placing on technology, etc. So definitely we're moving in the right direction. But maybe Jean-Noël, as you are actually in the business of producing and offering technical solutions to your clients, I think your point of view on this would be particularly interesting. How do you see it?
I would say that, of course, we are here to deliver technology to the customers, but the customers are not asking us only technology. So we need to deliver technology with the right trainings, with an architecture, working with services partner to deploy the solution, and at the end to help them to be autonomous with this platform and technology. And as we saw, and I completely agree on what Paul said. They have the right to make mistakes, and sometimes we have a lot of customers are coming, buying, asking for technologies when they are faced to the problem. So it's probably the best argument for us in terms of commercialization. You don't have the choice. You have to use and to pay. So to anticipate, of course, it's important to use technology and to have humans work, I would say, managing and monitoring the technology. And it's a balance between both, which allows to avoid the biggest attack. Let's remind what happened this summer, last summer, with the CrowdStrike event, where many stock markets, hospitals, transportation systems, airplanes stopped on the floor. Many effects in real life, because through tools we were able to deploy human error in a wide, very wide perimeter, and to impact everything. So we have to be able to react. We have to be able to find solutions when something is mistaken. And that's the reason why we have to be sure that the people on the ground using these technologies are able to monitor, I would say, the level of technology to keep, I would say, alive in this digital world. And you have to know that a company like ours, like Walex, is investing investing money to improve the technology and to improve the comfort and the way users will use this technology and will be able to use this technology. It is why I think it's a balance between both, which is the best solution.
Very good. Very good. I tend to agree. Before coming to George, I will just give a very, very quick anecdote, which is true. Many years ago, I gave a speech at a conference, and someone came up to me after the speech and said to me, "Do you think I should be deploying intrusion detection?" Which was a very interesting way of posing the question, because obviously they had leapt on the solution between brackets before considering the problem. And I've seen this many years as a sort of symptom of the cybersecurity environment, that people tend to latch onto solutions before fully understanding the problem. I give this introduction, George, because I know that you've been very involved in developing methodologies which stress this famous trio of people, process, and technology, and getting the balance right. So it'd be very interesting to know what your point of view is on, how we use technology.
Thank you very much, Steve. Well, I will not put my hat of professor. I will put my hat of a researcher. For the last 20 and more years, I have been involved in the development of the various versions of COVID, the IT governance framework. And we focused very much on the implementing adequate governance for the digital world can go through different components. We call them maturity components. And one of the maturity components is obviously technology, tools, technologies, services. However, there are 6 other components that are probably as important. And when I lecture or when I speak in conferences about those components, I finish with the technology one. And I always mention, I finish with this one because this is the first one that people think of. We start buying and then we hope that we are going to resolve our problems. I remember when I visited some friends who are CIOs, and I asked them, listen, Mark, you need to improve the way you are managing projects. No problem, George. We just bought a software. Or you need to improve your enterprise architecture. No problem. We just found a good tool for that. There are other components. One of them is assigning responsibilities. One of them is having competences. Other one is having some specific processes and methods to do things. Other one is policies. Other one is information, etc. And the question is, let us start by those others and improve our maturity by those other components, and then finish with technology when you identify that technology can help you, because it will be adapted and it will adopt your way of working. Not you have to adopt the way they impose on you. So technology is important as last instance, not as a start with. So thank you very much, Steve, to letting me talk about that. My favorite.
I think it was a very round discussion. So we saw the advantages as explained by Mihoko. We also saw some of the risks, and I think the conclusion is yes, technology is extremely important as long as we maintain this balance at the end of the day. So I can now hand back to you, Claire, for the next point, which I believe is questions.
We are almost at the end of our discussion. We have received a few questions on chat, and one was sent directly to me. Let me start with these questions. What are the most important topics in terms of the regulatory push to be addressed during the next cycle, now that a lot of cybersecurity topics in different geographies were addressed in a different way? A question sent directly to me also says, do we need more or less regulation in cybersecurity? And an example of effective regulation would be something like I don't know, spam control. It used to be that most of spam came from China, but the tightening of domain name rental has changed that. On the other hand, many regulations, especially executive orders from the US, had zero impact on the number of attacks in certain areas. So what topics do we need to address in the near future? And do we need more or less regulation? Paul, why don't you start again your topics?
Yeah, but just a few comments, and of course I speak a little bit from a European perspective. First of all, there is a lot of regulation, and this is across the world on the table. And what matters now, above all, is to get it implemented, and to get it implemented in such a way that it really works. So people are afraid because they see so much regulation coming, and the immediate reaction is, you know, this will be stifling. Well, let's see if it is stifling. Let's see if it is a big burden or not. But let's above all just get to implementing it now. And that needs to be a process that is accompanied, so a learning process. I mean, also this question about what is the time scale for compliance that has to get the feedback from people actually starting to use it and to comply, because there is flexibility in the law to then also adapt the severeness of the requirements, the amount of reporting that is required, etc., etc. And I think, come back to the point of need for speed, we need to do this quickly. This is really urgent. We cannot wait for that. So I think that's above all very important. Is there the need for more regulation? I'm not such a fan of only regulating. I think you need to have the back-to-back between rules and the building of capacity, the building of industrial capacity also, and international collaboration. So I would rather say, from the political level, I would very much like to see that people say, let's, well, Michael said it also, let's work together. This is not for free anymore. You have to work together.
Yeah, outstanding answer. Thank you. George, what are your thoughts? What's the most important, more or less, regulation?
Yeah, as mentioned by Paul, implementing a regulation is important. When GDPR was initiated and a few years later we had the pandemic, and when I talk with some relations that are head of a hospital, and I said to them, Philippe, you need to implement GDPR. George, what are you talking about? We are saving lives here. Do you have nothing else to do than implementing GDPR? Well, I think it is essential that regulations are not too many, and that people implement them. I'm active also in the as member of the Federal Audit Committee, reporting to the Prime Minister in Belgium, and we supervise all those audits that are happening on the level of the public service, all the levels of the public services. And we struggle in implementing some basic common sense, which means that every head of department, rather head of administration, director general, for example, has a basic vision on their own risks, their own list of controls, internal controls, and their plans for improving on those on a yearly basis. And they have so many other things to do than the basics that are implementing essential controls, implementing essential audit requirements. And well, again, we can create additional layers of regulation, but if the behavior is not there, then those regulations will not be very effective, unfortunately.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Again, impossible to disagree with what you said. In the interest of time, I'll move to the next and probably the last question, considering the time. What is the role and what should be the role of advisors with practical industry background in both the regulatory and practical set of issues in cybersecurity? Michael, you ran several committees of this nature when you were at the Imperial. What do you think the role should be?
Yeah, thanks, Claire. I think the various mechanisms for making use of this very valuable resource I mean, maybe in the context of AI, because that's just sort of very current. Imperial has, for example, some AI fellowships with people at Whitehall, who actually are in government agencies and do fairly substantial generative AI projects and so on. And then they're invited in typically for a day a week to meet with the research groups there and engage in a discourse, maybe also meet with senior leadership at the college. So in a way, I think that's a good example of how those expertises can be used, not as a one-directional thing, but really at the end of the day as a multi-directional thing. So it comes back to the sharing and moving this ahead.
Yeah, it has to be multi-directional to be effective. Excellent point. Miho, you have acted as government advisor in a variety of settings. What is your view on this?
So as more and more countries go into the directions to strengthen the regulations, I think it's more important for the industry to have a voice to talk to the government, like what kind of technologies that are getting into the market. And also, especially for the AI use cases are really important because context really matters for AI legislations or regulations. So use cases for developers, deployers, and also users have to come together, and industry has to deliver the voices to the government.
Jean-Noël, what's your view, concluding remarks on this topic, very briefly?
I think we are all working for users. So I think that, of course, the user's role is key, the advisor's role is key, and either to decide, but also to implement and to use after that in, I would say, an efficient way and a comfortable way, as I explained before. So I think that we are not selling technologies to people, to users, to customers. We are using, I would say, a solution where the technology is able to enter in the context of the business or the mission of an organization or a state. And it's why when we develop today innovation, we are developing open innovation where the users are centric. And so for me, it's of course key. The role of advisors is key. And as Mihoko explained, the use case are what interests our customers. And I remind just one thing, because I heard a lot of things about open source and Linux before. And it's true that I remind one of my journey in Estonia when I met a lot of people, the states, the ministries and users and technology providers. And I think that it's an interesting model where, of course, the users are in the core of their approach. And two things, I asked to the Ministry of the Digital what was key to become an e-government and an e-country. And he told me two things: features, benefits, transparency. And I think these both things allow Estonia to become e-Estonia. And it's interesting to keep in mind.
Yeah, excellent point. Features and transparency and user-centric approach always win, at least in certain areas of technology. I will now move to conclude this discussion. You certainly gave all of us and those who were here and who will watch the recording a lot of food for thought. Excellent ideas were brought forward. Excellent summary of specific issues was offered. Thank you very much for your participation. It's very much appreciated, not just by us, but those who will make great use of the information our distinguished panelists provided. Steve, your concluding remarks?
Yeah, thank you. A big thank you, honestly. Now, what for me is of course, that you're all, very, very experienced people, and this came across very well. So I was not at all surprised that the kind of remarks you were bringing were very mature and to the point. So what did I note? Of course, we have an explosion of issues to be controlled. We were mentioning geopolitical issues, technical issues, issues to do with people's behavior, etc. Totally agree with all these points. It just demonstrates, I think, the complexity of the landscape at the moment. I think some of the key issues are obviously being discussed in the cybersecurity space already. So Mihoko mentioned about skill sets, I think, which is very important. And we had this constant theme of balancing people, process, and technology. I think this will continue to be a key issue for the years to come. Again, info sharing. How long have we been talking about info sharing? At least a decade. I used to have a slot phrase for this, that it's all about giving the right info to the right person at the right time to achieve a specific goal. I wonder to what extent we're really managing to do this. I think we have a way to go in really achieving this goal, but it's good to hear these nice ideas of how we can improve this. What I really like myself, and again, I think it reflects the quality of the panelists, lots of practical comments. And I think the practical approach to cybersecurity is the one that has to prime. Yeah. So several people said implementation is important, couldn't agree more. Regulation is fine. If it doesn't get implemented, it's useless. Communication is important. It's a communication business. And common sense is key. And I really like this idea that a lot of security is about using your common sense. And then last but not least, of course, we had comments on budget and resources. I still believe personally that the whole field is drastically underfunded. You cannot say that a CISO these days is comparable to a CFO, and certainly not to a CEO, even though it's a so-called C-suite position. So some things aren't changing fast enough, I think, and we have a long way to go. But no, a big thank you to everybody. I think it was a great debate. I think we touched on a lot of issues, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you.